there any questions from the audience?
This is more a comment than a question, I guess, but if you want to comment on the comment, I would appreciate that. The adaptive management model that you outlined, it strikes me that another advantage of that is that it provides the kind of the feedback or looping mechanism for actually influencing subsequent iterations of policy support for nanotechnology research and development. In other words, that notion of adaptability can be, or should be, I think, to make an evaluative judgment, built into or reflected. So in subsequent iterations of the R&D process. And so the question is how best to see that is actually done.
Well, I think two things. One is I think this is a potentially rich area for research and study, both as a question of communication and participation. And, you know, I agree with you in a sense, right? If you phrase the question, should the people taking care of this problem have the capability to learn from experience, see what's going wrong, what might go wrong, fix it, and so on, everybody will support them. If you phrase it and imagine it in the context of managing a radioactive contaminated site or a waste repository, and the managers come before you and say, well, we don't really know how much radioactivity is going to get into the groundwater, and so, but we'll drill some holes, and if we find some, then we'll decide what to do about this. That actually produces a very negative reaction. So adaptability, if seen as something which people can build something positive on, can be a good thing. Adaptability, which looks like, well, I can't figure out how to deal with this, but I want you to take the risks, can be a very negative thing.
I'm going to refer over to Dietra because I think you're the sole representative of this ASU team over here, the CNS at ASU. Anyway, you know, we get these snippets online from these public engagement activities that they have going, and the most recent one, unless there was another one that came out today, but the most recent one talked about the working, you know, with the bench scientists, and that they're really quite amenable, and please correct me if I'm going astray on this, but they're really quite amenable to learning about the kinds of social values and risk perceptions and so on that the social scientists can bring to their attention as they're in the process of you know, developing nano widgets, if you will. And so that's what I mean about the adaptive management side.
I mean, potentially as well, monitoring, if it's done in a participatory way, is a way of alleviating some of this, that you can't see it, some of that you have no control over what's going on. I mean, if you give people a stake in it, and even, I mean, even in the radioactive materials case, giving communities capabilities for measuring radiation levels was really had really a big effect giving people a sense that they had much more access to what was going on, and to putting the discussion into a still pretty big box, but not as big as it had been. So I believe it has a lot of promise, but I do think that the promise requires care to realize, and the bench scientists have to be really interested if it's going to work.
I have a question from Dr. Martin Kloberg of Tennessee. He writes, you mentioned that risk management needs to pay attention to variables such as timeframes, etc., and their development of effective risk communication strategies. However, as Dr. Priest has mentioned, there may be some counterintuitive aspects of risk perceptions in the public when decision makers choose risk mitigation approaches. In fact, Wiedemann, Schutz, and myself have posited and demonstrated a self-fulfilling prophecy feedback loop in the societal amplification of risk that shows that if precautionary risk mitigation actions are taken, a regulatory action, then the perceived risk is increased, not decreased. This actually is part of our risk story model that includes moral factors. How do you think that risk managers should deal with this issue?
Okay. First of all, hi, Martin. Second, I actually know even though I'm not an expert on risk communication, I know the paper in question. I think I would start by just saying that increased risk perceptions or sensitivities to certain risks and so aren't always bad. So that, you can have such positive feedback loops, and this may make the risk managers uncomfortable because it means people are worried and they'll bother them. But in terms of broad social welfare, that kind of scrutiny and so on may not be such a bad thing. So the question really is, do you have feedback loops that lead to poor management, where people either squander resources or overreact or cause fearful publics to, so you have secondary hazards. There are lots of potentially bad things. And I guess my own feeling is that these are just problems that come up, but they're intrinsic to the broad scene. We can see whether this satisfies Martin. I suspect it won't.